Sounds like the fire is just getting good and going. So I'm glad you're here. You can hang out and listen to some great stories here on Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Blake. Let's go right into our first story and see what today has in store, shall we? I like to hike. I've made no secret about that. But I hope if you're an avid hiker, you don't encounter the focus of today's story. Let's hope that on your next hike, you don't encounter the Spider Mother. It was a hike that we would never forget, though we wished we could. My girlfriend and I were hiking in a familiar spot, just like we'd done 1,000 times before. This hike was going to be different, though. We would hike 3 miles in and camp for the night, wake up at 5 a.m., hike up to Helen's Overlook about 10 minutes from our camping spot, where we would watch the sunrise. While she watched, I would take a knee, pull out a ring I had bought a couple of weeks ago, and ask her to marry me. It was all so meticulously planned that I hadn't taken something into account, something no one could have planned for. We parked in the lot at the base of the trail. I'd hiked this trail and camped in these woods for years, and it seemed like a great place to bring my girlfriend after we got together. We'd been together for about 3 years, but it had been 8 months since we'd last been up here. We had meant to go at the start of spring, the changing seasons being our favorite time to be outdoors, but life had made it difficult, and we were excited to get back up here after a long hiatus. We grabbed our packs and headed into the woods, following the trail that would take us to the spot where we meant to camp. Technically, the Park Service frowns on people camping near the state trails. That being said, the spot where we meant to camp was off the trail and into the woods a bit. A ranger could still wander up and tell us to leave, but I sort of doubted it. I had only been asked to leave once the whole time I'd been camping here, and that was on an occasion when my brother and I had built our fire a little too high. We were smarter now, and we hadn't been discovered since then. "Sure is pretty," my girlfriend said, adjusting the straps on her pack as we walked. "Yeah," I agreed, looking at her more than anything. I slid my fingers over the velvety top of the ring box as we walked. I couldn't wait to give it to her, to see her surprise as I hit one knee and see her tearful delight as she accepted. It never crossed my mind that she wouldn't. We would get married in the spring next year and come out here camping for our honeymoon as well, so we could visit the spot again. Sometimes, however, God loves to laugh at our plans. It started with spiders. More specifically, it started with me running face first into a spider web. It had been hung across the trail, and the little builders fled as I slapped at the remains that clung to my face. I checked myself to make sure it hadn't fallen onto me, and when I was certain it was gone, I shivered as we set off again. From there, my girlfriend and I found ourselves dodging webs pretty often. They were just little spiders for the most part, but as they clustered together, the webs became more annoying. My girlfriend shrieked as one clung to her hair, and as I helped her check for stowaways, I couldn't help but feel crawly. I'd seen spiders in the woods before. They lived here too, after all, but never like this. I had expected that some of the late-season snows would have gotten them, but they were here despite it all. We followed the trail, dodging spiders and looking for landmarks, until my girlfriend finally said she had to pee. "I'm just going to walk over this way. Keep an eye out for other hikers?" I told her I would, and she stepped off into the woods to do her business. When she screamed a few minutes later, I ran into the woods expecting to find a bear or a coyote or something. Instead, I found my girlfriend leaning against a tree, shaking as she pointed to something strange hanging from the tree. It looked like a cocoon, but it was practically throbbing with spiders. I had once seen a wasp's nest hanging in the woods, the big papery-looking ones, and that was what it looked like more than anything. It was hanging from a nearby tree from the thick strands of silk, but I could see something rougher wrapped around the limb, too. The spiders were scuttling all over it, and watching it made me a little bit sick. Sorry, I'm incapable of doing it justice, but There were more spiders on this cocoon or egg sac or whatever it was than I'd ever seen. They had spun webs all over the trees and the canopy, and they just kept spinning as they attempted to encase the little clearing in silk. This was their sanctuary, and they meant to keep it safe from people like us. "What the hell is it?" my girlfriend whispered. "What the hell is that thing?" I didn't know. I told her as much. As little as I wanted to get closer to it, I couldn't help but slink in as my curiosity tried to get the better of me. The closer I got, the less it looked like a wasp nest, and the more it looked like cotton candy. I know what that sounds like, but it was almost translucent, and as I stared, I could see something inside. It was nondescript, like something seen through a dirty window, but there was definitely something inside that webby bundle. I had to stop myself from sticking my hand out to touch it, and that was when I saw something else that drew my attention. I would have completely missed it if I hadn't gotten so close, but now I could see the corner of something purple. It was underneath the spider cocoon, and a few more months would have seen the bundle get big enough to cover it, too, as it came to the ground. Something translucent covered it, and I looked at the bottom of the mass as I reached out a shaky hand to grab for the thing. "What are you doing?" my girlfriend asked breathlessly, but I ignored her. My hand came shakily into contact with the thing, and it was a plastic Ziploc bag. As I lifted it up, however, the back of my hand brushed something on the bottom of the cocoon. I grimaced as something wet slid down my hand, and as I saw something black and stiff fall to the leaves, I gasped and backpedaled towards my girlfriend. As the sun shone behind the thing, I finally got a good look at what lay inside, and my suspicions were confirmed. "We gotta go," I said, helping her up. "We have to call the ranger service right now." "What is it?" she asked, but I didn't want to tell her until I was sure. We went back to the car, and I called the rangers. In the meantime, I looked in the bag I'd been clutching the whole way down the trail. It was a purple notebook, the kind you could get at Dollar General for a couple of bucks, and inside was someone's journal. Her name must have been Lisa, because she signed all of her entries with it. The more I read, the more I came to understand that this was a journal she was keeping in a mental health facility after a suicide attempt. She talked about the medication they had her on, about the groups she had attended, about the phone calls with her parents she had, and how it had all helped her see that life had meaning and that she shouldn't squander it. She had left the group home with a new lease on life, but that lease had soon run out. The last entry was made about 4 months ago, about a week before one of the worst spring storms in a decade. "I just can't take it. Charles is gone. He says he can't handle my roller coaster emotions, and he took Sophia to stay with his parents for a while. My parents are trying to be supportive, but I can see what a burden I've become to them, my husband, and my daughter. So I've decided to leave. I'm going to hike the trails that gave me joy, and when I find a spot that I'm not likely to be found, I'll end it. If anyone finds this, my name was Lisa Turner." I closed it as a Jeep rolled up into the parking lot and put it back in the bag. The rangers were a couple of younger guys, college-aged, still very green. They told us to lead the way, and we took them up to see what we had found. They laughed as we tried to explain to them what we had found, joking that it was probably just a really big wasp nest. They shut up when we got to the spot, and they saw it for themselves. They called in a few other people, telling us to stay close just in case. They brought a fogger and some thick suits for dealing with pests. As the spiders either fell dead or fled their perch, one of the rangers brought a ladder and started inspecting the web mass. He was an older guy and looked like he'd been doing this since pioneer times. He shook his head and asked for the limb cutters. One of the younger guys scoffed. "There's no way you can cut that limb with those, Hawk." "Don't need to," said the older ranger, I supposed, who was Hawk. He told everyone to stand back and snip something at the top. The whole thing came down, and when it burst, I saw what I had feared inside. There was a woman in the cocoon, her body bloated and rotten looking. She was covered in moving tumors that had burst and began spilling little spiders out of her. She had a rope around her neck, the purple marks still visible on the bloated skin. Her face looked peaceful, despite the bulges and tumors where spiders had used her as an incubator. The police were called, and I handed them the journal, told them how we had found the body. They thanked us, the rangers telling us they would put our names in for an accommodation, but it was the old guy I was waiting for. He looked like he wanted to talk to us since he'd cut that body down, and when he leaned in close, so the others wouldn't hear, I knew he meant to impart some wisdom. These boys haven't seen this kind of thing before, but it's not my first time. I found a hiker 2 years into my job that had been used as a nest for ground wasps. I've found corpses savaged by bears, bones built into beaver dams, hikers skewered on the new horns of sporting bucks. Nature is beautiful, but it's unforgiving. You'll eventually forget what you saw here, but never forget the lesson. Nature will take you, if it can. It will take you, reshape you, and use you for whatever it needs. Be careful when you're in the woods, and always be courteous of the natural order. My girlfriend and I hiked back to the car in somber silence, neither of us having much to say. We didn't camp that weekend, but I did propose about 3 weeks later. I did it at our favorite restaurant, an Italian place in town, where we'd had our first date. She agreed with the expected amount of tears and squeals. I guess that makes her my fiancée now, and I'm glad to have her by my side. I've tried to forget what I saw in the woods that day, but I'm always mindful of my place when I'm in nature. Who's to say who might find me if I forget? Fire's really going over there. Looks like a perfect time to roll into our next story, which is one that I really like writing about. It's no surprise that I like writing about lesser-known cryptids, and this is one that I rarely hear anyone talk about. So let's hear a little story about another thing that means a lot to me: the allure of old books. Excuse me, I'd like to return this book. Mark sighed. Not another one. I'm very sorry, ma'am, he said, turning around on his stool to find the short redhead already looking unhappy. But all sales are final. She was tapping a copy of Wind in the Willows on the desk, and Mark grimaced as he saw the cover bow a little. When Mark had opened up this used bookstore, his retirement, he liked to joke, he had expected simple days of reading, writing, and enjoying conversations with fellow bibliophiles. What actually ended up happening was a constant stream of book collectors, people looking for deals, and homeless people looking for somewhere to use the bathroom. He'd been here for less than a month, and everything seemed to be going wrong already. Case in point, this mysterious thing with the books. He opened Wind in the Willows and knew what he would find inside. The beautiful illustrations of Toad Hall were there, but the words were gone. Some of the words were there, he noticed, as he flipped through the pages, but the majority of them were gone. This was the 10th book like this he had received in as many days, and it was becoming a big problem. He couldn't sell the books with missing words, and he shook his head as he opened the register and took out the $5 the lady had spent on it. I'm so sorry, ma'am. I have no idea how this keeps happening with these books, but I mean to get to the bottom of this. The lady nodded, mollified. See that you do, young man. I had bought it for my grandson, and he was very disappointed to find it in such a state. Mark nodded, but quietly suspected that her grandson hadn't given much of a damn about the book. Most of the child customers didn't have the attention span for anything without pictures. Wind in the Willows was probably not on his radar, and the little goblin would have probably preferred the Captain Underpants books he had on the display rack near the graphic novels. Mark waited until she was gone and moved out into the shop proper so that he could look through some of the books. He didn't know how this was happening, but he wanted it to stop. Words suddenly missing from books was bad for someone who paid the bills off the backs of bibliophiles, and as he started pulling random books off the shelves, he was alarmed to see that the tales of adventure around Toad Hall were not the only casualty. After an hour, he found 3 Dean Koontz novels, a couple of John Grisham's, and 3 Stephen King's, one of them a hardback copy of Firestarter, and about 7 more from writers he wasn't as familiar with, that were either missing words or missing whole chapters. It was infuriating, especially since he didn't understand how it was happening. He could understand if the books had been wrecked, but the books were often in perfect condition, except for the missing words. The copy of Firestarter could have gone for $25 to $45, and there wasn't a dog ear or a coffee stain to be found on it. Mark threw it across the store, pouting like a child as someone walked in and found him sitting in his little pile of ruined books. "Geez, Mark, have a little more respect for the written word." Mark cast his best unimpressed expression at Wayne before tossing a John Grisham at him, which he dodged. "I've got all the respect in the world for the written word. I just don't understand why it chooses to treat me like this." Wayne opened up the copy of Firestarter, the corner now dented in, and tutted as he looked over the pages. "That's really weird. How long's that been going on?" Mark slumped against the shelf, closing his eyes as he tried to fight off the headache that was building. "'Bout 2 weeks. Wayne stroked his chin, humming in a very convincing manner. Wayne was known in a lot of bookseller circles as a practicing wizard. That was the nicest thing that he was usually known as, and a lot of them called him a nut or a crazy. Wayne also had a pretty substantial following online, running a paranormal podcast and doing a lot with the local ghost hunting community, so he had money to burn. Wayne liked him. They had hit it off after a few encounters, and now Wayne came in almost every day. "Could be something supernatural," Wayne said, looking over the John Grisham that Mark had thrown at him. "Tell you what, let me ask around and see if anyone else has experienced anything like this." Mark shrugged. "Couldn't hurt, I guess. Shoot, there might be something to that. Maybe I've got an angry poltergeist that likes stealing words or something." Wayne shook his head, flipping the pages and looking at the words still on the page. "I doubt it. Ghosts usually don't affect things like this. I guess anything is possible, but I've never heard of a ghost stealing words from a book. I don't know. I'll ask around. Maybe it's something I can help you with." He took the copy of Firestarter with him, with Mark's blessing, and Mark started cleaning up as he moved the damaged books to a box behind the counter. His expectations were low, but he hoped that Wayne could help. He loved his bookstore, and he didn't want to close up shop due to something mysterious that was out of his control. Let it be poor bookkeeping, or lack of interest, or a fire, but not something he had completely no control over. Whether Mark succeeded or failed, he wanted it to be on his own efforts. Mark flipped the sign from open to close and locked the door as he prepared to go into his loft over the shop. It had been an all-right day. He had sold about $200 in books, thanks in part to Mrs. Shaw's summer reading list, but he'd found 4 more books with missing words. Nothing quite as financially devastating as the copy of Firestarter from earlier, but it was beginning to add up. The box of ruined books was now 20 in number, and Mark knew that there would be more. He turned off the lights on his little book kingdom and moved upstairs to start dinner. That was a problem for tomorrow, because now it was time to work on his real passion. Mark went up the stairs to his cozy little studio apartment, and after making something in the microwave, he sat down in front of his old typewriter to set to work on his novel. The novel was a sequel to his only bestseller, Ghosts of Lorelei. The book had been immensely popular about a decade ago, even getting a single season on NBC before being canceled, and a lot of reasons that the bookstore could operate in the red for as long as it had was thanks to the book sales from Ghost of Lorelei. His editor had been on him about writing a sequel for years, and after 10 years of middling crime novels and lukewarm police procedurals, Mark had decided to give it a go. Ghosts of Lorelei had been about Detective Jack Stryker as he hunted for a missing schoolgirl named Lorelei Hester. Lorelei's ghosts were the rumors, the friends, and the trail that grew colder by the day. Stryker found the girl, but it turned out that she hadn't been abducted, as her parents believed. Lorelei had overdosed on something on the roof of an abandoned building, but Stryker had to exorcise her ghosts, the masks that she had showed to others. When he finally discovered the real Lorelei, it was too late to save her, and Stryker was left with the bitter taste of failure and the corpse of a girl looking for escape. It had been a great story, and people had loved Stryker, the grizzled old detective who was sure that he had seen it all. His editor wanted a sequel, maybe a series about Jack Stryker, but Mark had never quite liked crawling into the skin of the old man. That's what he called it when he wrote, crawling into the skin and playing pretend for a while. Jack Stryker's skin, however, was leathery and not altogether comfortable. That's why it had taken him so long to get back to him, and why it had taken him so long to start the fiery effigy. He was clacking away, liking the feel of the keys beneath his fingers as he worked. Most people had upgraded to a computer or something by now, but Mark liked the way that writing on a typewriter made him feel. Something about hearing the click-clack of the keys, seeing the paper fill with words, and then running a fresh sheet in when you were done made his writing feel like an accomplishment rather than a chore. His editor wasn't such a big fan, not really liking the manila envelopes that he got with pages in need of editing, but Mark told him that was tough shit. If he wanted the story, then he could take it Mark's way, or not at all. Mark was enjoying his trip back to Chicago in the early 60s, Jack Stryker chasing a serial killer who seemed to have an axe to grind with Stryker himself. All the victims so far had been people he had helped, clients or friends or old colleagues from his time on the force, and all of them had been burned to death. Captain Reinhold seemed to think that Stryker might be in on this, a suspect if not the killer, and Stryker found himself at odds with the police as he tried to track down the sicko. The killer was 3 victims deep now, but Stryker was hot on his tail. He had chased him to an old apartment building. He was chasing him up the stairs, the lights dim and making his target hard to identify, and as they came to the roof, Stryker felt he had him at long last. He kicked open the roof access, his big old .45 out and ready, as he checked his corners and looked for the man who had been killing his friends. "It's over," he graveled out, taking a step out of the doorway. "There's nowhere to go but back the way you came. I've got you dead to rights." Mark hissed, letting the Salisbury steak fall into the plastic holder as it burned his tongue. He blew on the meat, his eyes never leaving the page, and tried the bite again as Stryker made his way across the roof. He was checking the spaces between 2 big AC units when someone lunged and knocked his gun away. The 2 tussled, the man's hood covering his face, but as Stryker pushed the hood away, he gasped in surprise as much as in pain when the man pushed him back and made a run for it. "You!" Stryker said, watching him run for the stairs. "It can't be! You died 20 years ago!" He grabbed for his gun, but the shot missed as the hooded man made it back into the stairwell. Stryker tried to follow, but he was still 10 feet away when the door banged open, and 2 patrolmen came out with guns drawn. "Jack Stryker, you're under arrest for the murder of Frank Richard and Moira Fisk. Drop your gun and put your hands up." Mark nodded as the sheet came out, loading a fresh one in as he typed. Yeah, this was good. This was real good. As someone laid on their horn on the street below, Mark sat up violently. He was in bed, a book laid across his chest as the lamp on the nightstand glared in his eyes. The car horn had only been half the fright. He had been dreaming, having a real nightmare. He'd been down in the shop, the whole place shadowy and muzzy, and every book he pulled off the shelf was empty. All of them, every single one, was empty of any words. They were piling up, their covers full of fresh white paper, and as he dropped them, they became a sea of pages. They churned and bucked, threatening to swallow him into the inky depths, and just as his head had threatened to go under, he had woken up with a start as the car horn blared. Mark looked at the clock and found that it was about 5:30. He could get up, make some breakfast, and write for a few hours before he had to open up the shop. Last night he had written so much, getting through the interrogation scene and Stryker's escape from custody. Now he was on the run, trying to find the killer before the cops caught up with him. Mark figured he was about 75% done, in the home stretch now, and he would soon send it all to his editor for final proofing. 20 minutes later, a breakfast sandwich in his hand, Mark sat down to start writing the search for the killer, Stryker now knowing who it was, but not sure how to find him. He had a fresh piece of paper in the typewriter, glancing down at the manuscript before freezing in pure dread. He picked up the top sheet, the start of Chapter 9, and his hands shook as he looked at it. There were holes in the paragraphs, gaps where the words had been neatly removed. "How?" he whispered, his hands shaking so badly that he thought he might tear the page. "How can this be?" It was one thing when it was down in the shop. There was no way he could go over every piece of inventory to make sure it was whole. But this was something he knew had been completed. He had written this. This was his. And now it was like moths had come in the night and eaten holes in it. Mark was shocked, outraged, and as the paper ripped near the middle, he forced himself to put it back down. He would have to recreate it. He would need that sheet to get it just right. He didn't know what he would do, but Mark knew that he had to do something. The bookstore was his retirement, but this was his livelihood. He had to protect this by any means necessary. "Excuse me," said a young fella, and Mark saw him flinch as he turned to look at him. Mark must have looked a mess, but that was to be expected. He'd been writing like a madman for the last 3 days, and for those 3 days he had been sending his work off at the end of each session. Sometimes this facilitated a trip to the mailbox at 3 a.m. Sometimes it left him tired as he opened the shop the next day. But it was worth it, if it saved his manuscript. His agent likely thought he was losing it, and maybe he was, but it kept whatever was doing this from eating his work. I was just wondering if you had any of the old Star Wars paperbacks," the kid said, stuttering a little as Mark cast his bloodshot eyes on him. "Third row, middle shelf," Mark growled, turning back to his computer screen as he furiously worked on his inventory. It wasn't hopeful. Mark had discovered about 15 books over the last 3 days, and the box was becoming fuller and fuller as he went on. He had lost about $500 of stock so far, and he knew that there was more to be found. The kid came up with a few books, one of them going into the box as Mark discovered that it had been ruined too. The guy wanted to buy it anyway, and Mark lifted an eyebrow as he handed it to him. The guy was leafing through it, looking at the holes in the paragraphs and shaking his head. "That's wild. How did you do it? I've never—" But he stopped as he glanced at Mark's face. Mark had been holding out his receipt, but it had gotten crushed in his shaking fingers as he glared at the kid. "You think I did this? You think I would do this to my books? Who the hell are you? Get out! Get out now!" Mark was unaware that he was shouting, but he couldn't stop himself. The guy might as well be accusing him of murder, and when he ran out of the store with his books, he nearly bowled over Wayne as he ran out. "Huh," Wayne said as he watched the guy take off. "You having a fire sale or something? Deals must be good. That guy practically sprinted off." Mark shook his head, pointing at the box of books. "Where have you been? Thought you were going to get me some answers. I'm losing books by the day here." Wayne put his hands up. "Easy, hoss. Apparently what you've got is pretty rare. It isn't something that a lot of people know about, and I had to look pretty far to get you answers." He took a little book out of his pocket and opened it to a marked page before laying it on the counter. Inside were a pair of mischievous-looking foxes, words hanging from their mouths, and they appeared to be eating them. The words ruin or rune were written above them, and Mark thought the name was pretty fitting. Even so, he looked at the page skeptically. Are you telling me that foxes are stealing my words?" "No, not foxes. Runes, or ruins. Translation wasn't very clear, but it's definitely something like that. They're from Germanic folklore, little creatures who eat written words. They also collect secrets and will ruin archives and libraries. They used to be favored by wizards who used them to steal their enemies' secrets, but Now the ones that are left usually just make trouble for writers and bookstore owners. Seems like something I should have heard about, Mark grumbled. Wayne winked at him. Hard to, when the little buggers eat most of the accounts of them. Okay, Mark said, still not believing any of it. So, how do we get rid of them? We trap them. We catch them in a journal, or something that contains secrets that they can't resist. Then we trap them inside with magic. Once they're trapped, they'll eventually wither away when they run out of words to eat, or someone comes along and breaks the magic on the book and they go free. By the time either of those things happen, they'll have gotten rid of the book anyway. Most people throw it away or bury it in a hole, but some people put it in a lockbox just to be sure. Mark sighed, not sure he believed a word of this, but willing to try anything if it would stop this from happening. Okay, what would it take to do this? Give me a couple of days to get the proper stuff together, and I'll conduct the ritual for you. The materials are pretty cheap. I'll come by tomorrow night after closing, and we'll get this done. Sound good? Sure, Mark said, letting Wayne get back to whatever occupied his day. Mark didn't think anything would come of it, but whatever could be done. If nothing else, maybe it would help him figure out what exactly was going on. Either way, it would break up his usual routine, and Mark felt that if he spent another day watching his profits slip down the toilet, he'd go crazy. His phone rang then, and when he answered, it was with the usual, "Second Chance Books, Mark speaking." His agent cleared his throat and asked if he was feeling okay. "Terry," Mark said, feeling a little better as his agent's voice rolled over him. "A little stressed about the new shop, but I've been converting it into work on the book. Why, is there something wrong with the new pages?" "Yeah," Terry said, sounding less than amused. "You sent me 3 envelopes in the last 3 days, and they've been getting weirder and weirder." Mark furrowed his brow. "How so? I thought the story was progressing well." "Well, the second envelope looked like someone took whiteout to it, and it's like playing Mad Libs to figure the story out. This last one is just blank sheets with random words on them. I know I said I wanted to see results on this book, Marky, but if you're having a mental breakdown, then maybe take a day or two to collect yourself, all right?" Mark felt the phone shake in his hand, his voice barely holding up as he told Terry that he would get some rest and feel better. Terry said that sounded great and wished him well before hanging up on him. Mark let his cell phone fall beneath the desk, putting his head in his hands as he wept. He had been careful, so careful, he had sent it away to stop this kind of thing from happening, but it was all in vain. They had gotten his manuscripts anyway. They had eaten it up, and they would do it again. Mark found himself thinking of the ruins or runes as something real now, and as he wept, he wondered what he was going to do. If this ritual or whatever didn't work, just what the hell was he going to do? When Wayne arrived the next night, he found the store closed. He knocked, and when Mark answered the door, Wayne could tell he was drunk. "Geez, Mark, you had it a little early, aren't you?" Mark shrugged, but he didn't deny it. In reality, he had spent the night before drunk and had simply carried over into the next day. He had been beside himself as he tried to figure out what to do, and the whiskey had been an easy outlet. Mark had never been a big drinker, but he found it soothing to fall into a comfortable numbness. He had come out of it just in time to remember that Wayne was coming over around 7, and he had stumbled downstairs just in time to hear him knock. He let him in, and Wayne produced a Mead notebook from his coat. "I collected some secrets from my counterparts. Some of them are pretty juicy, too. If this doesn't draw them in, then nothing will." He passed the notebook to Mark, telling him not to open it as he sketched some symbols on the bar. Mark watched the lines bulge and swirl as his head reeled a little. There were squiggles inside the circle, ancient-looking letters and strange crabbed swirls, and as he finished, he bit his thumb and dropped some blood into the center. To Mark's amazement, the circle glowed faintly, and when Wayne took the journal and positioned it in the center of the circle, the two stepped back like hunters from a trap. "Now we wait," he explained, but it didn't take long. It was like watching graffiti move, and Mark thought he might be hallucinating. He saw these sketches of foxes moving across the counter. Some looked like pen, some looked like pencil, and there were even a few that looked like charcoal prints. They were in many different styles and skill levels, and they all made their way towards the book. They entered the pages, eating the secrets, and when the last of them hopped in, Wayne struck. He lurched forward and slammed the book shut, the symbols burning themselves into the notebook. Mark heard a small scream from the counter. Wayne waited for the burn marks to stop forming before picking up the notebook and holding it out to Mark. "All gone. You should be fine now." Mark started to reach for it, but felt like he didn't really want to touch it. He told Wayne to take it, and the man seemed happy to oblige. He said he had hoped to study the little creatures, and as he left, he was humming happily to himself. Mark was just glad to be rid of them, and he felt better than he had in days. Mark jerked awake again, almost certain that the last 4 days had been a dream. He was lying in bed, a book across his chest, and felt like maybe he had been dreaming everything after the car had woke him up. If it hadn't been for the hangover, he might have even believed it. He had celebrated a little more after Wayne had taken the ruin away. Or was it rune? Mark couldn't remember, but he was glad they were gone. He had reached down to close the book when something caught his eye. Someone had doodled a little animal on the edge of the page, a dog or something, and Mark wondered how he'd never seen it before. When it moved off the page, still clutching a word in its mouth, Mark realized the truth. It landed on the floor, and Mark rolled off the bed and gave chase. It was like a cartoon, the little pencil-drawing fox easily escaping him as he ran after it. Mark didn't know what he would even do if he caught it, didn't know if he could catch it, but he knew he was mad. They had been caught, trapped in the journal, and the thought that one had been missed pissed him off mightily. It would get away and make more, and then they would continue to torment him. He had to nip this in the bud, get it before it could escape, and as it slipped under the door, he thundered down the stairs after it. He came into the shop, still livid, and that's when he saw them. The ruin, or rune, or whatever it was, disappeared into the shop, but the shining eyes of multitudes looked back at him in the light spilling from the stairwell. There were so many of them that Mark knew they would never get them all. It was hopeless. They would never stop, not unless he stopped them. The gasoline went up as it took hold of the bookshelf, and Mark laughed in his stupor as they burned. It was like a roach infestation, he thought, as it caught the dry books. Better to burn the whole nest and start over than spend months or years fighting them. He laughed like Nero as he watched Rome burn, and it wasn't until it was too late that he realized he was trapped. That made him laugh all the harder. It looked like the fiery effigy was him in the end. Stryker's story would never be told, and he would take it with him to the grave. Before he passed out, Mark thought that at least these little terrors wouldn't have his final story. He had ruined it all himself, and hopefully took them with him. Let's move right into our next video. Another real banger, as the kids do say. I'm always very mindful of how I interact with people. Not because of any fear of them retaliating like the man in the next story, but because, I just like to help people. I think it's a nice thing to do. But after writing this one, I'm certainly a little extra mindful about how I interact with our homeless population. After all, you wouldn't want to become the next subject of the beggar's deal. Penny for your thoughts, young man? I glanced down at the old man as he sat in the snow, his jeans getting crusty from the ice. He held a grubby coin in his threadbare glove, and his eyes looked up imploring me to take it. Homeless people weren't exactly rare in the city, and I was honestly tired of being asked for change today. I had been asked for change as I went to work that morning, several times. I'd been asked when I stepped out to have a smoke around 10 that morning. I'd been asked again as I went to lunch, and twice more as I returned. I'd been asked for handouts throughout the day, but this was the first one who had offered to give me anything in return. I reached down hesitantly, and when he moved it out of the way, I figured he would make his pitch now. The coin was rare, the coin would be special, he would want something for it, and I would be asked to give. Your thoughts first, son. An even trade, I'm sure. I drew in a noseful of cold air, thinking about making something up, before finally settling on the truth. Okay, you know what I'm thinking about? I'll tell you. I pass people like you every day, people on the street with nothing better to do than beg. Why not try to better yourself with all this time you have? Why not drag yourself out of your situation, rather than sit and huddle in it? You have the ability to get out of your current quagmire. You choose not to, and that makes me angry. I'd expected the old man to get mad. I expected him to get quiet and take his coin back. But he surprised me when he laughed. Is that what you think? That we're all just lazy bums out on the road with nothing better to do? I imagine you might change your mind if you had to do it yourself. I scoffed. Please, living off the generosity of others? This is a city of thousands. Even if only 1% showed you charity, that's still likely more than I make in a week. The old man smiled knowingly, and that should have been my first indication that something was amiss. Even then, I sensed that something didn't feel right here. This wasn't the usual kind of banter one had with a person, even someone like this guy. It was starting to prickle the hair on the back of my neck. Why'd I stop to talk to this fella at all? The whole thing just felt odd. Want to make a wager on it? The old beggar asked. He still had the coin out, and when I got a good look at it, I could tell it wasn't what I had thought it was. It was filthy, but it had the underlying gleam of gold. It was unevenly milled and thick on the edge, he showed me. Live for a week as I do, if you can. After 7 days, if you're still alive, I'll grant you any wish your heart desires. I shook my head, thinking the old man had to be crazy. What was he, some kind of genie? My mind flashed to the Beauty and the Beast story, too, however. Hadn't the fairy come to him on a snowy night and made requests? If I declined his offer, what would the consequences be? I shook my head. I was a grown man out here weighing fairy tales. What was wrong with me? Sure, old-timer, it's a deal. What do I need to do? Prick my finger? Promise you my firstborn? Just take the coin, he said, holding it out. But make sure you hang on to it. If you go the full week and lose the coin, well, I can't promise it'll end well for you. I rolled my eyes, reaching for it without thinking. I wasn't really afraid that it might be magic, more concerned that it might be coated in fentanyl or acid or something. I had gloves on, though, and I didn't expect that whatever he had coated it in would get through my leather wraps. I lifted the coin to my eye, looking at it in the dim light of the lamppost, and saw that it was bigger than I had thought it would be. It was the size of a $50, one side picturing a proud king, while the other side a grinning skeleton. The words Percussum est Della were printed on the front with Vivero ve del mare ab io emblazoned on the back. I knew that was Latin, but that was all I knew. The coin was old, some ancient edifice of commerce, and as I looked at it in the street lamp, it flashed in my eye with a stabbing pain. The last thing I heard was the old man laughing, and then I fell into darkness for some undetermined amount of time. I was awoken not by my alarm, but by the less than kind tap of a stick on my foot. Hey, I've already told you can't sleep here. Pack it up before I call the cops. I came groggily awake, aware of being cold and slightly damp before anything else. I put a hand up to my eyes, wondering what had been on that coin the old man had given me, and as my vision came into view, I saw a large man in an apron standing over me with a broom. He held it with the blunt end raised, preparing to swing it if I made any sudden moves. I put a hand up and told him that there was some kind of mistake, but when I raised my hand, I saw it was wrapped in threadbare gloves, the same ones that had been holding the coin last night. What's more, my clothes felt scratchy, like bugs had been crawling on me, and as I got up, the man with the broom tensed like he meant to take a swing. "I'm serious. Get the hell out of here before I call the cops." I told him I was going, and as I stumbled out of the alley, I saw that it was early morning. There was still ice on the ground, steam coming up through the sewer vents, and people were milling up the sidewalk on their way to work or wherever. I must have looked a mess because they walked past me without a second glance. The man with the broom was watching me from the mouth of the alley that I'd been sleeping in, and made it pretty clear that if I didn't start moving, he was going to make good on his threat to call the police. As I made my way down the street, I was already reaching for my cell phone. I'd call an Uber and get back to my apartment. I was unsurprised to find it was missing, as was my wallet and my house keys. No problem. They had no idea which apartment I lived in, so the key wouldn't do them any good. A car was something I never saw the need to own, so I had no vehicle for them to steal. The old man had gotten away with about $80 from my wallet at the end of the day, and anything he took from my bank account would be returned. I'd go to my apartment and tell them I'd been mugged, and they would help me get into my place. I hoped the old man had a good laugh after drugging and stripping me, leaving me in an alley as he dressed me like a vag and took my stuff. Live a week like us, indeed. I'd be back in my apartment in a matter of minutes. Then the police could show him what it was like to live as an inmate. I was full of indignant rage as I passed in front of the big shop window not far from my house, and that's when I caught sight of myself in the reflection. At first, I thought the old man was taunting me, following me to see what I would do once I woke up. But when I rounded on him to give him a piece of my mind, I realized I was looking at my own reflection. I was the old man, his leathery skin and short gray hair, and I just stood there, touching my face with my hand as I tried to make sense of it. "Live as we live for a week, if you can." I suddenly understood that there would be no going back to my apartment. There would be no talking to my bank or getting my phone replaced. I felt something heavy against my left butt cheek, and I reached into the back of my threadbare jeans to find the coin nestled there. I looked at both sides, the emperor and the skull, and suddenly discovered that I could read the words there. "Thus the deal is struck," read the emperor. "Live or be damned by it," said the skull. I wanted to fling it into the street, but I remembered what he had said and slipped it back into my pocket. I had noticed something else that both sides had shared. The minting date was a week from now, and that mirrored what the old man had said too. "Live for a week as I live, if you can." I nodded. How hard could it be? That first day was probably my high point. I was full of resolve as I walked around the city. I didn't have any luck with breakfast, but that was okay. I didn't see any need to beg. I'd find money if I needed it. Besides, begging would only prove that he was right. I was going to do something with my week, start a new job, or find an honest way to make money. So, I set out to find work. One look at myself was enough to tell me that I'd be turned away from most upscale jobs. I needed a shave and a haircut badly. My clothes were old and stained, and I needed a bath worse than I needed a meal. All these things were outside my grasp without money, but I knew where I might get some of them. I'd heard of the mission shelters. Everyone had heard of them, seen them on the billboards, or heard their commercials. I knew they had clothes I could use, and maybe facilities I could use to take a shower. If I could get myself back to rights, then I could secure employment and not have to beg. I would likely have to spend a night or two in the mission, but I would have a job and money, and I could get back on my feet before the week was out. I came to the mission around 9 and was met at the door by a man with a clipboard. "Good morning. Are you checking in?" "I was hoping to get some clothes for an interview, maybe a shower and some—" "Terrific," the man said, cutting me off. "Are you part of our employment program? You don't look familiar." "Well, no, but I want to use the clothes to gain employment so I can—" "Unfortunately, sir, those clothes are only for people in our employment program, and there is a sizable waiting list for that program. I can get you on that waiting list, but it's likely to be some time before we can—" Started getting a little indignant. "I mean, the clothes are donated. As a taxpayer, those are my taxes at work. I'll bring them back. I just need to look good for an interview." The man's well-crafted smile was beginning to slip. "Do you have an interview lined up, then?" I realized my mistake and admitted that I didn't. "Well, then, you have no reason to need those clothes. Now, if you'd like to get on our program list, we can do that, but again, that takes time." I was a little put out, the process seeming a little daunting, and I told him I'd like a meal and a shower, if I could. "And I want you to have those things too, but if this is your first time here, then we need you to fill out some paperwork so we can get you on our system. If you'll step right over here, we can—" "Do I need to register for a bowl of soup and a hot shower?" I didn't mean to become belligerent, but I was a little put out by the rigmarole. "Sir, have you been drinking? I believe I detect alcohol on your breath, and you're becoming quite upset. We can't allow you in if you're inebriated, and you have to be 24 hours sober before you can enter the mission. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave." I said some things then, things I regret now, and I didn't even see the young bruiser who stepped between us as I got in the clipboard man's face. When he tossed me onto the sidewalk, the man with the clipboard saying I wasn't welcome at the mission again, I got creakily to my feet and checked to see if I was all there. Other than some bruises, I was none the worse for wear. I was still hopeful that I could make my way without them, so I set off to find employment. By the end of the first day, I was shivering on a bench in the park that I'd never seen before. The park was less for joggers and bird watchers, and more for drunks and needlers. A pair of them were sharing syringes near an old oak tree not too far away as I tried to get warm under some newspapers I had scavenged. I tried to ignore my empty belly, too, as I lay with the cold wood beneath me. I hadn't eaten much today, just a part of a sandwich I'd found in a garbage can, and I was feeling empty as I tried to sleep. I told myself that tomorrow would be better, and I fell asleep, praying that it would be so. Just 6 more days to go. The next day I woke up ravenous, my head spinning and my mouth dry. It was early, first light, and I knew that if I wanted to eat today, I needed to get some money. As luck would have it, I found something not far from the park. There was a warehouse nearby, and I heard men unloading a truck as they prepared to load up another. I offered to help. Most of the workers looked like scabs anyway, and the guy with the magazine and the cigar told me that he'd beat whatever I broke out of me, and to get to work. I spent a few hours moving boxes from one truck to another, and when the guy came out and told us we were done, he put a $10 bill in my hand and told me thanks. "Come back tomorrow if you want another one," he said. I wanted to be happy as I looked at the crumpled bill, but I realized this wouldn't take me very far if I wasn't careful. I tried to make it last, buying a coffee from a gas station, along with a simple breakfast, but by noon, the tin was spent. I'd been walking the streets, trying to luck into some grunt work. I found another warehouse offering under-the-table jobs, but as the sun went down and we all came to the office to get paid, it seemed that the boss had left, and we were left with no options but to disperse or answer to the police. I went back to the same park again that night, but the cold after the sun went down was too much to bear in the open. I walked around trying to find somewhere to sleep out of the elements, and at around 2, I found a doorway that lacked the little rubber spikes they usually put out to dissuade homeless from sleeping there. As I shivered in the doorway, I told myself it would only be another 5 days. As I slipped into sleep, I hoped I'd be alive to see the end of those 5 days. The next day, day 3, I finally gave in and began begging. The job I'd found the day before wasn't open, the gates barred, and the snow deep enough to keep the trucks off the road. I was hungry, I was cold, and I didn't dare go back to the mission. So I found the warmest spot I could find and began panhandling. The crowd that morning was small, the snow closing a lot of the businesses, and they weren't overly generous. By the time noon rolled around, I had a few dollars and some change in the can that I'd managed to scoop out of a dumpster. It got me some junk that wasn't very filling, and I walked around looking for work as the snow began to melt. I was a little more wary about taking odd jobs, lest I get taken like the day before. And as the night began to settle and the people made their way home, I once again set up to beg. I was dozing against a wall, feeling weak and tired from the cold, when someone cleared their throat loudly. I opened my eyes to find 2 cops standing over me, looking cold and grumpy. "Move along, sir. You know you can't do that here." He poked my can with his foot, sending it tipping over as the small amount of change rattled out. "I'm not hurting anybody. I'm just hungry." "Doesn't matter. Hungry or not, you can't do that here. Get moving before we move you." I wanted to get indignant, but I simply didn't have the energy. I scooped up the coins and started trudging through the snow again. I didn't know where I was going, but I remembered the old man's words and knew I would lose what precious coins I had if I got arrested. I wasn't even halfway through the week, and I already felt like I might not make it to reap my reward. The next few days were a blur. I remember trying to donate plasma and being turned away for various reasons. I looked for work, but the snow had ground a lot of businesses to a halt. I found warm places that would feed me, churches and soup kitchens, but they weren't equipped to let people stay. I ended up sleeping rough both nights, shivering on stoops or under the slight cover of alleys, my blanket getting soaked in the snow as it melted beneath me. It was the most miserable I'd ever been, and it made me wonder where I'd ever gotten the idea that the homeless of the city were lazy. Looking back on my words to the vagrant, words spoken out of ignorance, I felt a deep sense of shame as I remembered how I had talked to him. He was just trying to get a meal, just trying to survive or find somewhere that wasn't a chilly bench to sleep for the night. And all I had seen was a leech trying to get fat off the hard work of others. As I lay beside a dumpster Friday night, watching people drink in the warm light of a familiar bar, I knew I'd never make that mistake again. Saturday dawned cold and dark, the snow melt making the ice thick on the sidewalks as the world came awake again. I had some luck after helping the owner of the store I was sleeping beside clear the ice from the front of the stoop. He patted my shoulder, giving me a plastic bag of sandwiches he was about to throw away. I marveled at them, counting about 12 of the plastic-wrapped squares, and he even threw in a cup of coffee to go along with it. I tried to tell him it was too much, but he waved his hands and laughed. "You're doing me a favor, really. Those sandwiches were going to go in the garbage before I almost busted my ass on that slick sidewalk. If you can get some use out of them, more power to you. Take them with my thanks." By 10, I had eaten about 5 of them, the coffee long gone, and I felt full for the first time in quite a while. It was something I had taken for granted, that feeling of being nearly too full. But as I sat in the park, my blanket keeping the worst of the snow from soaking into me, it felt good to be here again. I had refilled the coffee cup from a nearby fountain, and as I drank water and soaked up the sunshine, I felt pretty good about the direction I was going. "Hey, friend!" came a familiar voice, and my eyes snapped open as I started to bolt. It was a man in similar dress, his face scraggly from many days of beard growth, and he was smiling through his remaining teeth at me. I could smell him between the 10 feet that separated us, but it wasn't an altogether unpleasant smell. He simply smelled earthy as opposed to bad, stale in a way that made me think he was taking care of his clothes when he could, and the jacket he wore bulged humorously, making me think he wore at least 2. "Whoa there, didn't mean to scare you. I was just wondering if I could trade you for one of them sandwiches. I've got some of them vitamin C packs from the free clinic. You can mix them with your water and get something nice to drink to go along with your full belly." He was holding out a crumpled silver packet with the words "Emergency" on the front, and I nodded as I held out a ham and cheese for him. He smiled again, asking if he could sit as he tore into the sandwich with gusto. He had clearly not been eating well, and I realized that must have been the way I had torn into the first one that I'd eaten earlier. "Name's Carter. Good to meet you, friend. Haven't seen you around. Are you new in town?" I told him I was, since it wasn't technically a lie. He laughed and told me I'd picked a heck of a time to come to town. It was the worst snowstorm they had seen in a long time, and the homeless guys were having a hell of a time keeping warm. Between the mission and their paperwork, and the cops and their endless rage for guys just trying to get by, and the shopkeepers not wanting us in their alleys or stoops, it's getting hard to find a place to lay your head most nights. A few others had wandered over to see who Carter was talking to, and they traded some food for the sandwiches as well. I ended up giving away a few of them, and as the afternoon stretched on, they all decided to migrate somewhere to find warmth for the night. I told them good night, meaning to find my own place to sleep, but Carter called my name before they left the park and asked if I was coming. "There's always room for one more around the fire," he said. I spent that night sitting in an alley that was in the middle of a four-way intersection of buildings. It cut the wind nicely, and someone had secured a tarp to keep the snow off of us. The barrels here had coals burning in them, and the people who stayed here had created a kind of oasis in the swirling snow. "It's not much, but it's better than nothing," Carter said. I spent the evening in the company of other cast-offs, laughing and sharing food around as we warmed ourselves by the fires that glowed throughout the night. Someone had a guitar, other people told stories. I fell asleep against a wall in the best shape I'd been in for the last 5 days. I wished I had known these people from the start, and wished I had found a place from the very first day. But I was introspective enough to know that I would have insulted them at the start of this strange journey. This was a place I had come to naturally, a state of mind I had reached on my own, and as I slipped into a blissful slumber, I hoped it wouldn't simply disappear when I woke up, like some kind of dream. I wish it had now. The alternative was a lot worse. I woke up to the sounds of people yelling and running. One of the barrels had been turned over, the coals making smoke as they tried to catch a sleeping bag on fire. People were screaming, scooping up what they could as people moved in the dancing shadows with purpose. I shivered beneath my blanket, certain we were being attacked by demons, but as the shapes got closer, I saw they were police officers. They had discovered our camp, and now they were taking away our one refuge from the cold. I sat as still as I could, trying to be unseen, and when they moved away, I made a break for the nearest alley. I saw flashing lights and heard someone yell at me, but I just kept kicking up snow as I ran for my life. The sun was turning the horizon a hopeful pink, but I just kept moving. When people got in my way, I went around them. When bus stops or stoops rose up to block me, I moved around them too. I didn't dare stop until the sun beat down on my neck, and only then it was because I just couldn't go anymore. My legs were tired, my head spinning from overexertion, and when I flopped down onto the bench in a bus shell, I was out of breath. I kept trying to make sense of what had happened, but it just wouldn't mesh in my brain. Why had they come after us? We weren't hurting anyone. We were just looking for a warm place to gather. They had come in like we were terrorists, and I hoped that Carter and some of the others that I had met had made it away. I didn't know how long I sat there, but as my stomach started to growl, I knew I would need food. I thought I might put out my hat and try to get some money. The longer I sat there with my eyes closed, the more I wondered what the point was. The oasis now felt like a dirty trick. They'd allowed me a moment of happiness so they could pull the rug out from under me, just as I thought I might have found something better. I almost preferred the uncertainty of not knowing what to expect. As the day passed, I continued to sit on the cold metal bench. What was the point after all? if everything could change in a second, if all safety was an illusion, then why do anything? Enjoying your new life of leisure? I jumped, realizing someone had sat down next to me. I opened my eyes and realized it was me. I looked exactly the same as I always did in the mirror, but I realized that it had to be the old man, pretending to be me. As I sat here, day had become night, and just like that, we had passed 7 days. I'd done it, had weathered the storm, and I like to hope I was a better person for it. Just basking in my newfound sense of understanding, I answered, realizing it was true. I took the grubby coin out of my pocket and held it in my hand, finding a strange warmth coming from it as we sat in the chill. Well, you made it, and a deal is a deal. What will you wish for, now that you have all this knowledge? I put the coin in his hand, feeling the warmth transfer between us. I want the means to make sure no one else has to live like this. I want to help people, even if it's just in this town. Is that too vague? He closed his hand around the coin, and I felt that warmth radiate through my stomach. I can work with that. I closed my eyes, and suddenly, I was me again. I was sitting there as if waiting for a bus, and when I got up, I knew what I had to do. It was hard starting out, but the backers came, and as the money came, I slowly fed them. Slowly, I brought them off the street and gave them a place to stay. A decade ago, I took a coin from a beggar. Today, I own one of the largest shelters in the city. There are no confusing forms, no prerequisites, no red tape. We feed those who are hungry. We house those in need. And when I see the hope in their eyes, I know my wish has come true. I like listening to the fire crackle. It's soothing, cathartic, you know? I hope we don't hear the dying cries of any little ruins in my fireplace, 'cause I'm certainly not one to burn books. This next one is an oldie, but it led into some pretty great things. If you know, you know. So let's hear a little more about some of my fans' favorite cryptid that this channel has made up. Let's hear a little bit more about the Brandylou. He took a shot of whiskey to gather his courage and approached her from across the bar. He'd seen her here before, her curly black hair and flannel shirt making her stand out a bit in this sea of name-brand dresses and trendy cocktails. She wasn't a cosmopolitan kind of girl. He'd watched her nurse the same tumbler of whiskey all night as she sat near the wall and watched the crowd. He'd learned to covet her smiles and laughs, that bright flash of sparkling teeth as some stage play of the human condition went on before her. Not that she had anyone to share her smiles and laughs with. Every time he'd seen her, she'd always been alone, and her joy seemed only to come from the people who heaved and thronged around her. She was an island in their ocean, and he was going to discover why tonight. As he made his way towards her, he couldn't help but wonder why no one else ever approached her. She always sat in the same dim corner of the Colonnade Bar, a run-of-the-mill bar in Seattle, Washington, with her back to the wall and her eyes trained on the byplay between the patrons. The Colonnade was not as crowded as the dance clubs or the upscale wine bars that dotted the city like ticks, but it did tend to attract a certain kind of people. Young college kids in their early 20s, bohemians looking to brusque on the small stage or talk to potential clients over craft beer, fishermen back from a long day on the decks, office drones, trust fund kids looking to rub elbows with the common man, and any other misfit who was just looking for a drink and some conversation were typical fare in a place like this. It was a friendly place, a somewhat chaotic haven, and those who frequented it often felt like they became family. But, in the 2 years that Russell had seen her come in, only the bartender seemed to acknowledge her presence at all. Noelle had looked over at the woman when Russell asked about her, and shook her head. No, I don't think I know her name. This had been a few weeks ago, back when he was still gathering his courage to talk to her. Noelle had seemed the best one to talk to for information. Noelle was the owner of the bar and had been bartending here for quite some time. She seemed to know just about everyone here, and Russell figured that she would be the best source of information. Russell pressed her for more information about the strange woman, as she handed a frothing glass to a bearded hipster who'd pushed up to the bar to order. Well, how long has she been coming here? Does anyone talk to her? Noelle looked up from the shot she was pouring. As she looked at the woman, Russell saw the head of black curls look back towards the bar, and affix Noelle with a decidedly mistrustful look. She doesn't talk to anyone. No one talks to her. I would suggest that you leave her be. For your own safety, Noelle said dismissively. For his own safety? The statement had seemed oddly chosen to Russell. Maybe Noelle knew more about her than she was letting on. Perhaps the woman was dangerous. That's why no one approached her. Maybe she had been coming here longer than even Russell believed. Maybe it would be safer not to approach her. As he parted the bar patrons, however, he had already made up his mind that he would talk to her. From the moment he had first noticed her, he had felt drawn to her for some reason. He almost felt like it was his fate to speak with her. Who was he to deny fate? The whiskey in his hand sloshed thickly as he walked, and he nimbly dodged some Chad in a visor as he stood up suddenly. His caw of indignation drew the dark-haired girl's gaze, and she seemed to notice Russell for the first time as he approached her table. She looked away, her casual posture now looking forced, but he couldn't help but notice the furtive looks she was casting his way, like a rabbit scenting a predator, like a hungry dog that doesn't want to bite. "Excuse me," Russell said, standing over her as she perched on a spindly chair. She ignored him, purposefully ignored him, and he could sense an unwillingness to acknowledge him that was almost spiteful. Her glances dared him to try her, confronted him with continuing down this path, and he worried that maybe she was unstable. Maybe Noelle had been trying to save him some trouble, trying to save the poor girl some face, and Russell had gone and made himself an unwilling star in the next public spectacle. He dipped his head a little and excused himself, turning slightly to go and hoping to be instantly swallowed by the crowd. When her hand came out and caught him by the arm, she had a strength that surprised him. He would not have expected such a grip from a 5'2" frame. "You've made the trip. You might as well stay." Her voice held a strange aura of languages. It sounded Irish, Slavic, Russian, Western European, the tones of the old country. Her voice had been places, seen things, lived through the Depression, survived the Spanish flu, and knew what it was like to be a stranger in a strange land. He had heard their first conversation 1,000 times in his head, but this was as far from the voice he had imagined as salt was from sugar. As he took his seat, the plastic cushion beneath him became a bear trap. "I'm sorry," Russell began. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I've been watching you from across the bar for a long time, and, I felt drawn to me," she said in that old worn voice. He nodded, entranced by her as he sat within arm's reach of her enigma. She smiled. "Would you believe that you're the first person to tell me that in a very long time?" He nodded again. "I don't understand how anyone can be in the same bar with you and not feel the same way. I felt the same way once, a long, long time ago." She looked down at her empty whiskey glass and seemed saddened by it. "When I sat down across from him at this very table." Russell leaned in a little, enchanted by her words, as she spun her web for him. "When you sat down across from who?" he asked, almost dreamily. He would puzzle over how he'd felt that night for many nights to come, and all his brain could find to compare it with was the nature video they had sometimes watched in school. You see the fly walk into the mouth of the Venus flytrap, watch the jaws close around it, and ask how it could be so stupid as to walk straight into the jaws of death. The fly is a capable survivor, a quick little nuisance that evades the human hand with ease, but it still walks into its grave with no hesitation, as though it just can't help itself. When he remembered that night with her, he knew how that fly must feel when it narrowly escapes the mouth of the trap, when it glances back to find itself longing to return. "Would you believe that he told me someone would come to talk to me. That he told me to expect you. Isn't that funny?" "So funny," Russell said, dreamily, unable to stop himself. The whole world shimmered at the edges while he was around her. Russell never wanted this moment to stop. He was captivated, utterly bewitched, and he felt that he would gladly go on basking in her glory all night. On the other hand, she looked as though she were getting a little tired of the whole affair, and just as quickly as he had risen, Russell began to fall. What if she left? What if she just didn't want to talk to him? He didn't think he could stand it if she wasn't... He didn't even notice that she had taken his drink until it was already in her hand. She lifted it to her perfect Cupid's bow lips and took a sip. The last beads of the whiskey clung to them as she pursed them and blew atop the surface of the amber liquid. In that breath, a corona of light was born. Dazzling, it stunned him temporarily as he watched the universe dance in that brilliance. She brought the glass away from her lips and held it out to him, delicate hands wrapping the glass perfectly. He was powerless to stop himself from reaching out to take it. "Drink this. It might bring things back into focus." Russell drained the glass in a single pull, and things immediately began to change. The woman across from him didn't become less attractive. She didn't really change at all, but he became more aware of his surroundings and less aware of her. The busker on stage warbled back into consciousness. The sounds of the crowd rose from an insectile ree to something rumbling. He felt the edges around his vision harden as he looked at her. She was still cute, but she was now possessed of a look that led him to question her gender. Her flannel shirt and tight jeans now looked mannish, and her bouncy curls and facial features now made her look a bit androgynous. Had she always been this way? Why had he been so captivated by her? He jumped a little when Noelle put a glass of whiskey next to her elbow, but the woman just flipped a bill onto her tray and lifted the glass to her lips. Noelle, however, looked mad enough to spit fire. "You know the rules, Brandy. This is neutral ground. No hunting in my bar." "Relax, Nona. You know I do my hunting elsewhere. Besides, he's seeing a little clearer now. Aren't you, sport?" Russell nodded and told Noelle he wanted another whiskey. She nodded, but she gave him a sad look that was equal parts pity and disappointment before leaving. He suddenly felt like a disobedient teenager whose parents have waited up for him after he stayed out all night. He wanted to call her back and apologize, but he felt silly and squashed the idea before it could take root. What would he begin to apologize for anyway? "You were saying?" Russell prompted as Noelle made her way back to the bar. The woman looked up from her drink and fixed him with a quizzical look. "You sure you want to hear it, kid? It's not a story to be taken lightly." Russell nodded, sure that he wanted to hear it more than anything in the world. She set her glass down and extended a hand across the table to him. "My name is Brandy, but when this story took place, they called me Elizabeth. Beth, for short. I was 19, naive, and in love for the first time in my life. I met him in a bar, much like this one, and he changed my life forever. Have another drink, won't you? I think you'd be a lot happier with another drink." She lifted the glass to her lips again, and Russell watched as she breathed a corona of fire into the whiskey. He wanted it less this time, but he still reached for it. He downed it quickly, the whiskey like a bonfire burning in his guts when he swallowed it. Her face swam a little when he looked back up at her, the third glass settling sluggishly as his head swam. "He was young and swarthy when I met him. I believed he was the most handsome man at the bar, and I suppose he was. He had saved me from a handsy drunk about a week before, and I'd been building up my courage to speak with him. He tried to dissuade me, just as I tried to dissuade you, but to no avail. Glamour hits a human hard, and I was certainly no exception." Russell shook his head as Beth took a sip of her drink. As she talked, he started thinking that maybe she had spiked his drink with something. As he watched her drink, her nose, so cute and turned up, now looked pug-like, if not piggish. Her curly brown hair was a little less lustrous, more like old yarn that looked coarse as it sat against her skull. As she closed her eyes in mid-drink, Russell had to do a double take. Were those horns amongst her curls? He could clearly see one, a curly ram's horn that poked through her curls, but the other one hid behind a lock of yarnish hair. She seemed to notice as the glass came down, and grinned a little too brightly. "See something you like?" When Russell didn't respond, she shrugged and continued. "Where was I? Oh, yes, my mysterious savior. He tried to talk to me, as I tried to talk to you, but I was so caught up in him that I barely heard him. Finally, he did as I have done. Only then I was able to break through my own desire. He apologized for what he had done, for giving me what he called a curse, and began to tell his own story." She took a sip from her drink and shrugged at Russell. "I won't bore you with the long version. Don't think we have time, anyway." The soft buzz of the bar around him sounded like the quiet voices of insects. Russell didn't know how long he'd been talking, but he was surrounded by a different kind of glamour now. The longer he listened to her, the less human she appeared, and the more he feared what she had to say. Her ears were becoming long and bat-like, long black hair curling up from them. Despite this, he couldn't look away. There was still some of that beauty there, like an unfinished wooden idol that begged to be carved. The story demanded to be finished, demanded that he receive it. He told me that he had found himself taken with a young man in Greece when he was around my age. This young man had tried to turn him away, but finally had shown him what lay beneath the glamour and the terrible curse that he must now bear. The man I spoke to was a Brandylou, just as the man who gave him the curse was, just as I am, and just as you will be. Russell sat back a little. Me? But why am I? You have drunk of my essence. The pact is already forged. Brandylou are creatures outside of time, capable of living for thousands of years, or for a single hour, whatever fate she desires. She? Russell asked tentatively. We, and there are more of us, are servants of the Pale Lady. She brings the green. She defeats he who devours, and she keeps the world in balance. We serve her as we serve all growing things. We serve her by thinning the herd. That sent a chill down Russell's spine. The man who turned him never told him that. He told him all the rest, but never told him of his purpose. As we sat in the hot bar on a summer night at the turning of the 19th century, he told me of his first time. He told me how he realized his true purpose. She leaned in close, and when she smiled at Russell, he could see her teeth were long and fearsome. "Drink this one slowly, while I tell you of the horrors that await you." She handed him the whiskey, but Russell hardly wanted it. I remember barely being able to process what had happened, when suddenly he was gone. I panicked and staggered out of the bar in a haze of spirits. I heard Noelle screeching behind me, but I didn't stop until the nightlife had enveloped me. There was an emptiness in my guts, and suddenly I felt the need to be as empty as that feeling. I retched and retched, the passers-by diverting around me. When all that was left was dry and painful heaving, I began to stagger home. He had forgotten one essential part, you see. He forgot to tell me that my first time would be the worst. She drank off half of her glass, a glass Russell hadn't seen her refill, but seemed to be saving the other half for a special occasion. I staggered in, and there she was, waiting for me. My sister was a woman grown, 16 and so mature. When I came through the door, she ran to me to make sure I was okay. At that moment, I could smell her. I could smell her fear, her joy, the aroma of her slowly rotting meat. When she wrapped her arms around me, I felt my mouth press against her shoulder. She wanted to know where I had been and why I had been gone for so long, and she was so glad to see me, and so glad I hadn't been picked up by some bad man. Her sobs of joy suddenly turned to sobs of pain, however. She screamed in terror when I bit her, my teeth becoming knives as I wolfed down her flesh. I could feel the spot inside me filling then. She was filling me as she disappeared. I discovered my purpose then. When the voices came to see what all the ruckus was about, I hadn't left a bone or a shred of flesh to mark her as someone that ever existed. She finished the glass and called for another. Her cheeks had become very red, and when she looked at him, he could see her face had taken on a distinctly goatish cast. She looked only partially human, half-human, more beastly all the time as the two of them talked. He heard the sound of hooves beneath him, heavy equine steps on the marble floor, but he dared not look at what other horrors now surrounded him. So I left. I left and kept running until I found myself here again. I held no illusions that I would have 600 years, but I've seen much of the world in my century of life. I've seen much, learned much, eaten well on many occasions, but I have always lived with the knowledge that you would be waiting somewhere for me. Russell went to take a sip and found his own glass. It was empty too. When had he drunk it? He had been so entranced by her story, and now, before his eyes, she had become more beast than woman. Her furry face was marked with dark brown hair, and as he stared, she seemed to wobble like a mirage before his stunned eyes. He told me you would be, that one day you would be waiting for me in this bar, and it would be my time to go. His time lasted nearly 900 years, but it seems my own has hardly begun. Russell shook his head, trying to clear it. But why? Why must it be this way? Brandy shrugged. You got me, kid. This is how it's always been. One Brandylou transfers his power to the vessel, who can penetrate their glamour. But I was fooled by your glamour. You had to... You saw me in the first place, despite me not wanting to be seen. The rules are very clear about what must be done. Don't fret too much. I've lived a long life, eaten well when I had to, seen much of the world, and can die with no regrets. In a way, I suppose it's a blessing. I do not envy you what you must do. There's a war coming, Russell. The carefree days will soon pass, and when the cold comes again, the Brandylou will be summoned to her side, and once more called to serve their queen. But as for me, she drank the whiskey off and saved only the smallest puddle at the bottom. My time has come. Good luck, kid. Russell had so many questions, so many things he wanted to ask, but suddenly the hooves were behind him again, and this time he did turn to see their owner. Behind him stood a strange beast the color of spring mud. Her feet were scrunched into wicked hooves. Her legs seemed to have too many angles to be comfortable to walk on. She wore an apron. The garment looked odd as it hung over her torso like a child's nightshirt, and it held a tray in one hand. Her eyes bore into him, and he was suddenly aware that this was Noelle. She was a creature who had lived hundreds of years ago and still served at this halfway house of oddities. She shook her head slowly, the green eyes full of summer fire, as she surveyed this new thing that had taken Russell's place. She did not seem to approve. The accords with strange mean that I tolerate you, Brandylou, but they do not mean that I like it. You will find shelter here, but mark my words. These walls are neutral ground, and I will suffer no hunting here. Find your sport elsewhere, or be dust before your time. Russell gulped and shook his head. Noelle, it's me. It's Russell. You know me. Her gaze never faltered. Whatever you were is now gone. What you are will follow my rules, or be damned for it. But she's the Brandylou. I'm only... There's no one here but you, loathsome creature. I will suffer no tricks and tolerate no bloodshed. Be about your business and do not linger. And with that, she clopped off as Russell sat gape-mouthed. He turned back to ask what Noelle had meant, but found his companion was nothing but a pile of clothes and a spilled puddle of whiskey. Whatever she had transferred in that final drink had been given, And now Russell knew it was he who must go on. It was he who must carry on in her stead. It was he who must be the Brandylou. One more story for you, and then I think it's time for me to head off for another of my famous naps. This last one, though, is one that's very near and dear to my heart, and I hope it's one of your favorites, too. So, let's hear about one of the best reasons to watch what you buy at the thrift store. Let's hear a little tale about a broken mirror. The mirror showed Dominic reflections that weren't his own. The mirror was an oddity, but an oddity that he would come to rely on. The hell is this thing? Dominic had been browsing for things he could sell at his local thrift store, and the mirror had caught his eye. It stood out because this shop didn't usually put trash out with their junk. The mirror was fractured in 7 places, and it looked like someone had punched it in the center and sent spider cracks through the glass. At first he thought it was some kind of joke mirror, because when he looked at it, he saw 7 different reflections, and only 2 of them were his. The 2 that were him were on the top right and the bottom left. The left one showed a much younger Dominic, as he shuddered on a metal frame bed in Clarence County Prison. At first, he thought it was just some inmate. Everyone kind of looked the same with a bald head and stripes on. But he would never forget that cell. It had the swastikas carved on the wall behind it, the legend that stated "cops are bastards" below it, and the picture of his then wife that he had stuck up with toothpaste to add some color to the cell. It was him all right, but the one across from it was much more interesting. The top right showed Dominic picking up a painting in the art section, a painting with a price tag on it that read, $2,000 in your pocket. Dominic was no fool. He wanted to make sure this wasn't some kind of weird trick first. He'd grown up in gangs and living rough, and he knew a hustle when he saw one. It was an impressive hustle, to be sure, but it still smelled like a hustle to him. Dominic went to the little section they had for art, and sure enough, there was a weird picture of women sitting on a balcony, their faces seeming to grin and scream all at once. The price tag on the front was not for $2,000, however, and was for a much more reasonable $10. Dominic thought it over, pulling out his phone as he snapped a picture, and looked to see what it was worth. He found a page for some artist named Roland DePriest, and it just so happened that a lot of his paintings were going for big bucks since he'd recently offed himself. A quick look told Dominic that this was indeed a DePriest, and the going price for it was about $2,000 as of this afternoon. He picked up the painting and the mirror, deciding to take both home with him. "What you want that ratty old mirror for?" asked Mr. Drussel, looking at the broken glass without much interest. Clearly, he couldn't see what Dominic saw in it, and that might be for the better. "I like the frame," Dominic lied. "Think I might use it for something." Mr. Drussel looked at the painting in a precursory way, but shrugged as he tapped it all up on his calculator. $10, he said, holding his wrinkly hand out with expectation. Mr. Drussel did business in cash, and did not truck with the little plastic card machines. "What about the mirror?" Dominic asked, not wanting to get scammed after the fact. Take it. I can't sell a broken mirror, and the frame looks ugly anyway. If you want it, then by all means, take it off my hands. Just don't cut yourself on the glass. I'd hate for you to try to sue me after I gave you such a great deal on it." Dominic nodded, thanking Mr. Drussel as he left the little shop, with a tinkle of the bell overhead. The painting sold for the proposed $2,000 to a scalper friend of his, and the mirror Dominic hung in his bedroom. For a week, the mirror did little more than show him going about mundane tasks, and Dominic began to wonder if he really had been had. The little inmate still stayed in his cell, sometimes going out for chow, but mostly just staying and looking sad. That tracked. Dominic had spent a lot of his time being sad about one thing or another. Sad that he was stuck in prison for 5 years at first, then sad that his wife had left him towards the end. He He tried to figure out what the other spots meant, but they were kind of mysterious. The middle two showed awful things he didn't like to think about. He was a tough guy. He'd been in his fair share of scrapes and seen people get killed in his lifetime. But this stuff was so much worse. People beating kids, people killing their wives, people hurting animals, and everything in between. The one next to it wasn't much better. He could see mothers tucking in starving kids, homeless people crying as they used the last of their money for a bottle of cheap alcohol, even little kids huddled together as they hid from someone. Some of what that mirror showed him was terrible, but some of it was as helpful as the painting had been. The top left panel showed a woman he knew all too well as she went about her daily life. He should know her. She was his ex-wife. The bitch had divorced him while he was in prison and took most of his stuff while he was too incarcerated to do anything about it. She had taken advantage of him while he was at his lowest, and for that, he hated her. In that respect, he thought of that tab as his eternal enemy, and even wrote it on a post-it note and stuck it to the wall. The mirror turned out to be useful when it came to avoiding her, proving itself one day just as he was about to leave. He was going out on a date, his hair freshly cut and his cologne not too heavy, when someone knocked on the door. His date was supposed to meet him at the restaurant, but he thought maybe she'd come to pick him up instead, and came out of the bathroom towards the front of the house. He was walking past the mirror when he suddenly saw his ex standing outside a very familiar door. She did this sort of thing sometimes, especially if she could Facebook stalk enough information to realize he was serious about someone. He hid out, letting her knock for a while longer, but she finally got bored and left. Dominic was only a few minutes late for his date, and used this little peephole often so he could avoid running into his ex. On the other hand, the bottom right panel showed him an older man he had never met before. Watching that guy was like watching lifestyles of the rich and famous. He ate expensive food, drove expensive cars, wore expensive clothes, and went to bed with somebody new every time Dominic noticed. He decided to leave that label blank for now, not really sure what he was seeing or how it would come to affect him. He found that on days when he didn't have anything better to do, he was checking the mirror to see what he could see. Dominic had definitely found some windfalls from the mirror. The 3 scratch-offs he'd won kept his rent paid, but he was looking for another big score like the painting. On the top right, Dominic was back at the thrift store, but it was a different one today. Dominic watched as he picked up an expensive-looking fur coat, putting it on as he preened a little in front of the mirror. Then, he stuck his hand in the pocket and pulled out a diamond watch that, even to an untrained eye like Dominic's, looked expensive. The thrift store was known to him, a little second-hand store on Mulbank, and after checking that his ex was still at her job, he decided to go see if lightning would strike twice. The thrift store wasn't crowded, and the coat was loud enough to be seen from the entrance. Dominic assumed that it would reek of liquor and cheap cigars, looking like some wannabe pimp's prop, but the coat was in immaculate condition. The tag said it was a Vanderfur, a brand even Dominic was familiar with. He put it on and went to the mirror, preening a little as he'd seen himself do. The coat looked good, very good in fact, and it would go well with some of the shoes he had at home. As he stuck his hand into the pocket, however, it was time for the moment of truth. At first there was nothing. Then suddenly, his fingers touched the harsh surface of an expensive watch. Dominic pulled out a Rolex with, honest-to-God, diamonds on the face. The whole thing gleamed obscenely, and Dominic longed to slide it on and feel the weight of it. This was the sort of thing that he had dreamed of as a kid, driving around town in a fancy car, with a hot girl in the passenger seat, and an expensive timepiece on his arm, in a primo coat. He'd be the envy of anyone he knew, but as he turned to go, he heard someone at the counter asking about the coat. "It was a Vanderfur. I donated it this morning, but my watch must have fallen out in the pocket. Please, I beg you, I need that watch back. It belonged to my father, and it has great sentimental value." Dominic intended to walk right on without acknowledging the man, finders keepers and all that, but as he caught sight of him in profile, he felt his breath whoosh out in a gasp. It was It was the guy from the broken mirror. The guy who lived so lavishly. Dominic couldn't have said why, but suddenly he was tapping the guy on the shoulder and holding out the expensive watch. "I heard what you were saying, sir. I came to buy this coat and found the watch in the pocket. It's too nice for me anyway," he said, smiling as the joke fell flat. The older man's smile went ear to ear. "Oh my God, thank you, young man. I can't believe how kind you are." "Yeah," Dominic said. "Me either." The man stood mooning over the watch for a few minutes as Dominic paid for his new coat. It was a little more than he strictly wanted to pay for a coat, but he found that he liked it, and it would help him remember a time when he'd been so generous. He started to think that maybe he could sell it for more than he'd paid for it, when someone stopped him on the sidewalk. The guy was running after him, asking him to wait as the watch threatened to slip off his wrist again. "I owe you something, at least, for being so kind," he said, panting a little as he caught his breath. "It's really okay, mister. You don't have to." "I insist," the man said, taking a watch out of his suit coat that looked almost as impressive as the one he was wearing. "My father bought me the watch you found when I was 18 and about to leave for college. This watch doesn't have nearly as much sentimental value, but I think it will help you nonetheless." He put the watch in Dominic's hand and patted it warmly. "I'm in your debt, sir. Hopefully, I can find a way to repay you someday." The watch was nice. Not as nice as the one he had, but still nice. Dominic sold it for about $1,300 and used the money to not only float himself for a while, but also buy a much cheaper timepiece that still looked richer than anything he'd ever owned. He too wanted a reminder of that warm feeling he had felt when he'd done something nice for someone else. With the rent on his dingy apartment paid for the next few months, Dominic was spending a lot of time watching the mirror. He had decided that the panel with the rich man might be his greatest friend, if his ex was to be his greatest enemy. The top and bottom corners were his past and future, and he used the former to enhance his own future often. The middle two were still a mystery to him, but he felt like they might make sense in time. The top panel, the one that took up the most space, however, made him a little more uneasy. It was gray, the sky full of cracks as it swam like a puddle when you throw a rock into it. Dominic felt like he knew that sky, but he couldn't place it. He'd never seen a gray sky like that in his life. Except he had. He knew he had. He just didn't know when. He tried to look at that space as little as possible, but it kept drawing his eye, making him want to take the mirror and throw it somewhere where it couldn't make him feel that way anymore. That was usually how he got stuck looking at the middle two panels. Anything to take his mind off that gray sky full of cracks. The mirror kept showing him things and leading him to opportunities, but it wasn't until he saw one of the faces from the middle panel that he thought he knew its true purpose. He would later reflect on what leap of ego had led him to believe that he knew the purpose of such a thing like this. He was at Marcy's buying groceries one day when he saw a familiar face in line, the true nature of the panel seeming to come to him. He'd seen the woman before. Too many mouths to feed, and not enough hours in the day to work to feed them. She was standing at the register, her card having been declined, deciding between a gallon of milk and a box of diapers, to diaper the baby, or have milk for the other 4. "Here," Dominic said, paying the cashier the remainder from his own wallet. He had no idea why he had been so moved to help, but it made him feel good to do so. The woman thanked him profusely, almost to an embarrassing degree, but Dominic told her not to worry about it. She could pay him back if she felt strongly about it, and here was a little more to get her through the week if she needed it. The woman cried as she tried to refuse him, but the money went into her purse regardless, and Dominic smiled as he watched her go. After that, he began to use his money to help others more often. The mirror helped him invest his windfalls, helped him change his life for the better, and as he grew, so did his altruism. Suddenly he was no longer giving money to single mothers or tipping bills into homeless people's cups, but he was helping the city open shelters providing programs with startup capital so they could offer meals to people in need, and changing the poverty-stricken neighborhood he lived in for the better. That was how he reconnected with the man from the thrift store, and it was a meeting that would change his life forever. The mirror had shown him that today he would meet someone who would change his life, but he had never expected it to be the man who had begun his charity. As he gave the keynote speech, he could see an ocean of faces that had once looked hopelessly out of the mirror at him. He had given them the hope that they now saw, and the feeling made him tingle. He had always wanted to be someone who could help others, even as he struggled to help himself. He had never realized it. He had something worthwhile to give now, and he was on top of the world. As he ladled punch into a plastic cup, he heard a voice that he hadn't thought of in 4 years. "Looks like you've come a long way since the thrift store. I almost didn't recognize you until you started to speak up there." Dominic turned, and there was the man who had given him the watch. He extended a hand. "We've never been formally introduced. I'm David Rothschild, philanthropist and tech mogul." "Dominic Fraser, it's nice to see you again." And it was nice. The two of them talked for the rest of the afternoon, and when they parted ways at sunset, they were already working out plans for a venture together. Dominic had given him some stock advice, something the mirror had showed him the day before, and the two parted with promises that they'd get together again very soon. Dominic returned to his apartment, the same dingy one-bedroom he'd lived in for years, wanting to see what the future had in store, now that he'd found a man like David to partner with. Instead of grand business ventures and philanthropic outreach, however, he was greeted with himself, stabbing his new friend to death. Dominic stared at the mirror for a moment, unsure of what he was seeing. This couldn't be his future. Why would he do such a thing? He had a lot of respect for David, and couldn't imagine why he would want to hurt him. It had to be a fluke, a trick of the light. But every time he came back to the mirror, it showed him the same thing. His knife, red with David's blood, and David lying on the floor of his tiny apartment. It never changed. It never wavered. And Dominic decided that enough was enough where the mirror was concerned. He put it in the hall closet, shutting it and its proposed future away for good. At least, he hoped so. He spent a lot of time with David in the coming months. The two did a lot of good for the community, for many communities, and Dominic saw himself living a part of that lifestyle that he'd only seen through the mirror. Jet-setting, eating lavish meals, living the sort of life he had always dreamed about, and with a friend like David, he could live that life with an ease that he had never known. Dominic was the happiest he had ever been, or he would have been if not for the dreams. In the dreams, he always saw himself standing over David's corpse as he bled out onto the tacky carpet. In the dream, he could hear the sirens approaching as he stood over the man like a conquering hero. In the dream, Dominic knew that his life as he knew it was about to come to an end. It started very subtly. Dominic began spending days back at home instead of with David. He was busy with other projects. He needed to give attention to some local charities. He needed to reconnect with his roots and remember the people who needed him. These were all excuses he gave his new friend, but in reality, David had begun to resent his business partner. David Rothschild, who had everything except a criminal record and a checkered past. The more he thought about it, the more he wondered if David was going to mess him up on purpose. Did he know that Dominic was supposed to kill him? Was this his way of stealing his happiness? Just like that bitch of an ex-wife of his. Were they in this together? Was she so unhappy with his success that she would stoop to making him miserable again? Dominic spent all his time in his apartment, staring at the mirror and willing it to show him anything but the bloody end of his happiness. When the knock on his door came, he realized he hadn't left that apartment in weeks. He was wearing the same clothes he'd been wearing the day before. Or was it the week before? They clung to him sweatily, and the smell from his pants made him think that he might have soiled himself. Now that he was back from his trance, he wondered when was the last time he had eaten. His stomach growled angrily, and he'd gotten up to go to the kitchen when he heard the knock again. "Dominic, are you there? Your secretary said I could find you here. Are you home?" David again. Dominic got up, walking angrily to the door. He could send him away. Better lose a friend than lose his life. He liked David a lot. He was a good friend, but he liked being a free man more. He had wasted 5 years in prison, and he'd be damned if he'd go back. He didn't care what some mirror had to say. He wasn't going to let anyone jeopardize his future. "Go away. I don't want to talk to you." "But why? What did I do?" Dominic closed his eyes, trying not to let the rage that was building behind them out. What had he done? Like he didn't know. He was only trying to steal his freedom from him. "I don't owe you an explanation. Please, just leave. I don't want to hurt you." "I'm not leaving until you tell me why you're acting like this. I'll stand here all night if I have to. I just want to see what's going on with you. I'm worried, Dominic. I'm worried about you." Dominic didn't remember opening the door, but suddenly the two men were face to face. Some of his neighbors were peeking out of their apartments, trying to see what was going on. Dominic just knew they would be something to talk about tomorrow, and he shuddered to think what sort of stories they might weave. A lover's quarrel? Maybe David had stolen Dominic's girlfriend. Maybe they had stolen money from each other. Who was to say? And all of it would likely paint Dominic the worse for it. "I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to see you. Can't you just respect my wishes and—" "Something's going on. You're not acting like yourself. Did someone say something to you? Did you hear something? There's a lot of rumors going around about me. It's the same with most rich people in my circles. I just want to know why you're so—" Dominic was sick of hearing it, and shut him up the only way he knew how to. David's tooth flew down the hallway when he hit him, and suddenly the two of them were rolling around the floor and throwing punches. It was the kind of ugly fighting you see in desperate people, and as it rolled into the apartment, Dominic realized he couldn't pummel David into submission. Despite being a decade older than him, the man was in better physical shape than he ever had a prayer of being. As David rained down blows on him, Dominic sent his hands searching for something to defend himself with. The knife was something he had lost years ago, a steak knife that had tumbled from his plate and rolled under the couch forever. But when his fingers locked onto it, he knew what to do. Before he knew what was happening, he was standing over David, the other having been stabbed more than a dozen times. The sirens were coming, and as Dominic let the knife slip from his numb fingers, he realized they had taken it from him anyway. His life, for better or worse, was over now. Well, not all of it. There was still a little more left. The trial had been short. They had found him in the apartment, with the murder weapon, and the victim, his prints all over both of them. There had been witnesses that had seen the two fight, and it seemed to be an open and shut case. The Rothschilds found a slew of witnesses willing to testify that Dominic had been the aggressor, and with his checkered past, all his lawyer could do was get him life. It had been a sham of a trial, and Dominic didn't know why the court had bothered with it. They wanted him to be guilty. The mirror had told him as much, and now his life was over. The guards at Clarence County smiled knowingly when they saw him get off the bus. "Welcome back," that smile seemed to say, "and didn't we tell you you'd be back?" As he lay on the floor of his old cell, the cell they'd seemed to think it was so funny to put him back in, he realized what the gray sky had been showing him all along. As he lay on the filthy floor and looked at the cracks in the ceiling, he finally realized why they had looked so familiar. This was his life now, his life and his death, and he wondered how long he would have to look at those cracks and that pitted, pitiable concrete before someone came along and put him out of his misery. If the mirror knew, it certainly wasn't telling anymore. And just like that, we're at the end of another of our story times. Thank you so much for coming and listening to my stories and spending time with me. So many of you tell me that it's the highlight of your day, and I have to tell you, it's the highlight of mine too. I just love sitting by the fire and sharing great tales with great people. Till next time, This is Dr. Plague, wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.